Okay,
Sorry, that's not. I don't. Maybe you could just summarize that.
yeah, if anyone has concerns with what we've done before you could actually hear us, we called the meeting to order and approved it. We approved the adoption of the agenda and we approved the minutes of the June 6, 2022 meeting. Does anyone need further clarification on that? That is on Zoom that wasn't able to hear.
Let's give us a thumbs up.
Okay, perfect, thank you. Okay, we're on to the updates, communications from stakeholders. This time we don't have any. Committee questions and feedback from between meetings, there were none. The student feedback via the thought exchange is going to be Tracy.
Yes, so at your last meeting, you asked for distinct feedback from students, and there was some work by a few of us between meetings. And what we ultimately did was pull the student responses from the thought exchange discussion. And I can share the thick stack of student responses with folks if they want, but what might be most helpful is to say, first, their feedback was very similar from the total group feedback in 3 ways. One, their comments suggested an interest or a need for some sort of side-by-side comparison of the 2 futures. They had questions and concerns about transportation and travel, and there were areas where misperception suggested the need for factual information. There were 2 key ideas that were unique to students and worthy of highlighting. And one is they advocated for student voice and a role in planning and deciding as changes impact the experience of students on a day-to-day basis. And 2, their comments reflected the importance of being thoughtful about school culture and the importance of relationships. So those were the 2 key things. And I can add those themes to the merger study report. And that is the student update.
So this was only during thought exchange?
Yes.
Okay. And does it say where they are from, or was it?
We didn't sort of have it.
Okay, thank you, Tracy. And we're looking for the warning and amendments to articles on H 727.
Yes.
That was signed on June 7th.
Right, it was signed on June 7th, so that is the law now. Let me find my pages of notes. So you gave me some additional homework after the last meeting. And one homework assignment was to answer the question that you asked about the warning, what needed to be in the warning, and related to that was a question about changes to the articles of agreement, who has authority to change what. The new law answers that question for us, and excerpts of that law were attached. The short answer, or linked actually, not attached, to that item in the agenda. The law requires that the warning contain 2 articles in substantially the form that's written here in the text of the document. I don't see, when it says you must use 2 articles, I don't see that you necessarily have the option to add more articles, but if you wanted me to ask legal counsel about that, I would. The 2 questions basically ask, do you vote to form, and do you vote to have a board comprised of a certain number of seats allocated in a certain number of names? That main article does not contain the names of people. The voting on board members is on a separate ballot. And it's on my radar to make sure that with an advisory district, that we're really careful about our wording for the conditional seats. Related to that, beginning on page 4 of the excerpted document, and it's page 59 of the main bill, the answer to questions about amendments to articles of agreement is right there. Only the voters can amend the conditions or agreements in the articles of agreement that were voted on in the warning, and the Union School District Board may amend other specific conditions of the agreement in the articles of agreement. It was not in the warning. Further, there's clarification of language that's worth highlighting around reduction of grades operated is not applicable in this case. Number of board members, that is the one exception. In the case of a board that has proportional seats by town and or weighted voting, the board has the authority to change the board seats consistent with the most recent census without bringing that to the electorate. So the board can change that to keep that in balance if there's changes in membership or things like that.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yes,
So what this is saying is we submit this instead of our articles of agreement? Are articles of agreement something anyone votes on or not? I guess I'm confused.
the articles of agreement are like the contract with a charter for the operation of the new district. And this, where it says warning, our version of that is what gets printed on the actual ballot. And
So
it's
our
the way-
articles get printed on the actual ballot or not? I'm confused if this gets printed on the ballot or if that gets
No.
printed on the ballot.
This gets printed, the text of the law gets printed on the ballot. So it will say,
But it implies that these articles that we wrote are what they're voting on?
yes,
Okay, so it's
If
an
you
article
read-
about the articles.
yes. It's basically a long way of saying,
So how do you,
so part E of the question says, the provisions of the final report and proposed articles of agreement approved by the State Board of Ed
Yeah.
on a certain date, which are on file in the office, shall govern the Union District.
Okay,
So it's a super long way of saying, do you approve the articles of agreement?
okay,
But it does include explicit excerpts from or information from your articles of agreement, like the grades to be operated,
right, and there's some like amend as necessary.
right? The assumption of debt.
so I guess I had a couple of questions. One is how you tie the two docs together, and you just explained that. The other one is, particularly on the MAUSD side of the house, there were articles that were voted on in the warning, and then there was other articles that weren't. Resulted in the school board having expression on change. There's a lot, and out of that process, as this whole town's right to vote thing went down, there was a lot of discussion about how those articles were worded, who could do what with them and why. So I think, at least, again, from the MAUSD side, we should understand if all these articles are going to be made part of what's going to get voted on, or if there's articles that we're going to not enforce by a vote, why, if that makes sense.
And we can add clarity to the report on that. But the articles that will be voted on will be the one about grades to be operated, the operation of schools, which means, your commitment to operating K-12 as opposed to closing high schools and tuition students. Your board representation, assumption of debts, and assumption of debts. And lastly, who's necessary and who's advisory.
So that leaves a lot of gaps.
But it's really clear in the law now, whereas it wasn't. So if you'd like me to ask if you can include more, I can.
I mean, from my point of view, the sensitivity, the MAUSD district, we need to figure that out and be really crisp on what's being done. Because if I understand that, all the work we've done and soul searching we've done on Article 14 will not be bound by a district vote. It will be at the discretion of the school. Is that fair?
And they seem very interested in making sure that article was, let's say, a quality article, I think, last Wednesday, and what I observed.
Yeah, a lot of their, you talking about the State Board of Ed,
Yeah,
a lot of their discussion hinged on
that article,
that
and then
article.
we should have it in,
I'm not,
or not.
personally, I don't know why we wouldn't make all the articles voter subjected to voting approval. If there's anything that if
Well,
we did that would bind the school board unreasonable.
I will,
That's the opinion at this table.
I will ask the question. You have until early August to have that warning ready, maybe even later. I have a timeline, which I'll speak to in a little bit.
I have a question. So when Kevin said, saying like, I just need clarification, like, what does it mean to subject it to voter approval? Like, when you say these articles need to be subject to voter approval, and we're talking about leaving some out. So, yeah, what does that mean exactly? When you say these articles need to be included, so then we leave other articles out, like, can you just explain that?
Right. Basically, what the law says is if a specific article is included on the warning, on the vote, on the ballot that people vote on, in the future, if people want to change that, it has to go through a voting process, has to go to voters to change, as compared to an article that's just in the Articles of Agreement and approved by reference to the main question, then the board has the power to change that without having the electorate vote on it.
So which ones are necessary? Like, which ones exactly are the ones that need to be on the ballot?
Forming district, the necessary and advisable districts, the grades to be operated, that you will operate schools for K-12 or pre-K-12 rather. The method of representation on your board, which would be proportionate by town. Assumption of debts and ownership of school property. That's it.
So we have 12 pages.
And that all goes on the ballot.
Yes.
So all that
Our
wording,
article wouldn't.
No,
just that wording, okay. I'm just trying to be clear in my head on this. Sorry. Maybe it's clear in everyone else's. I want to know what the ballot.
and
Yeah,
in all reality, it's not, when we did Act 46 mergers, we used the exact wording from the articles, and this may not. use the exact wording, it'll be excerpted from your articles, but it may not be as exact. But, you know, as soon as I know the direction that you're going, I can start working with legal counsel on a draft warning for you to take a look at. And in the meantime, I'm happy to follow up on the question of whether or not how much you can add to the articles. And perhaps you can comply and have 2 articles and add more subparts, A, B, C, D, E. Perhaps you can add an F instead of Y. So I will look into that for you.
So the ballot could be very lengthy.
It will be very lengthy, no matter what.
Is it true there's 190 pages?
Not to the ballot. There's 190 pages to the
To the law.
to the law, yes. Before it gets put in that tiny 8-point font and put in the law book. So if this goes to a vote, I expect that you'll either request an early for absentee, or you'll go to the polls on November 8th. And you'll have 1 2-sided ballot that will be the question on should we merge? And then you'll have a second piece of paper that's going to be 1-sided that says, if we merge, who do you vote for to be on the board? And by the way, that's pretty much what it would look or feel like every time you vote on the budget annually. You'll have a budget ballot and any other questions related to that. And then you'll have a separate town, this is who I want on the board. Because they get counted differently, so they have to go in different places.
So we'll make public then, these are these approve the articles that need to be approved. Those will be made public ahead of time for people to be reading so that they know. I mean, they're public now, but
Yeah.
I
So,
guess I'm confused. So they aren't going to be on the ballot. They're going, because you're just going to have, much like when you vote for the budget and school board members, you're going to have just that 1 page.
exactly.
Right, but. Okay.
So just like voting for the budget, there's some expectation incumbent on voters to go.
Right, to
and
go
look
be
at what the
informed.
budget says, and
Sure.
the same here, go look at what the articles of agreement and the report say. There's also perhaps, you have to have an informational meeting, right? Where arguably the responsibility is to make that information
Right,
available and
sure.
answer questions. And there's also the opportunity to educate in other ways, newspaper articles or advertisements, direct mail, whatever you choose.
Thanks.
So shall I move on to homework number 2?
Yes.
The question was about the state's definition of school closure. And that is also linked as an excerpt from page 727. And I can't remember what exact number is, but and on the very bottom of the first page, and it's page 182 of the 190-page document that I referenced, the definition of school closure starts in the second to last line. As used in this section, closing a school building means the district ceases to use the building to provide direct instruction, direct education for a majority of the grades operated within the building on or before July 1, 2022. And when we get to the legal review, I asked your legal counsel to propose language that references that definition in case you wanted to add it to your articles in the school closure section.
So could that make it so that, like in a K through 2 school, like, well, who is it, like Orwell and not Orwell, Sudbury and Western, right? They're like broken totally in half. If they decided, let's swap who goes to which building, It
What
would be
district
allowed
is
to-
Orwell and Western?
Not Orwell, Slate Valley.
So I don't know what their articles of
Right.
agreement are, and they have not merged,
Okay,
formed a union. So that
Hmm.
school closure law
doesn't,
doesn't apply. This
Got it.
only applies to new unions in the next 2 years.
Oh,
Right?
got it.
That school
Okay.
closure piece was a special kind of hold harmless.
thank you.
But
Wait
it
a
goes,
sec.
it
No,
goes
that's
away
not
in
true.
2 years.
It's repealed on July 1, 2024.
Yeah, I want to check that because it might, and I don't want somebody from Orwell or Leicester
No, it's
to
not.
listen to this or somewhere else and be confused.
It was only just by how they defined majority of the grades prior. But
Yeah.
they're not closing the school, they're just
So-
swapping grades, it probably doesn't matter anyway.
This applies to all union school districts. So if they're not in a union school district, it doesn't, but every union school district is prohibited from closing a school through 2023 per this definition unless they meet certain other criteria.
So that there is this elephant in the room called repurposing. And there's a lot of discomfort still on the MAUSD side of the house that closure and repurposing don't equal each other. And in my mind, I kind of rationalize it. If we talk about taking grades out of a school, at some point, it doesn't matter if you're repurposing that building or closing it. In fact, if you take grades out of there, you're affecting what our language is to negatively affect the operation at school. But so I think we need to at least be either, and perhaps it's just being clear on that wording, or somehow make people comfortable with the big sneaky slide of repurposing as opposed to closing.
Again, when we get to the legal review, you can look at that language. And we can talk about what it means. And what you want to do. So homework number 3, you asked about what page 727 says about joining an existing district. I didn't give you an excerpt from this for this, but and the question really was, what are the options for Lincoln now that they're withdrawn? And page 727 gives them 2 options. One is to go through a merger study process, just like you experienced, and develop new articles of agreement and bring that to the state board and to the electorate. The other is to join an existing unified union district under the terms of those articles of agreement. And that has a 2-step process where the town would vote, or the district that wanted to merge would vote. And if they vote yes, then the other member districts, the receiving district in a merged way, in a commingled way, votes. So if Lincoln continues on their own and 3 years from now, they say, this is really hard and we want to rejoin the district, there's a more streamlined way for that to happen. If they're comfortable joining under the terms of the articles of agreement you have, and the law and your articles already take care of the, and we know exactly what we're going to do with the board when that happens. So we don't have to figure that out. And the new board with the new members just adjusts.
Under option 1, you said the school district Lincoln would merge, it would go through a merger.
The question was, what are the options for Lincoln now that it's withdrawn, if it wants to join in the future? or any district, Ripton could say, we want to join. And there are two ways for that to happen. One is a full merger study and one is,
See, a merger in that case would be, they would come in as co-equals with our. No,
that would happen if you were made a supervisory union by the state board. I would say, I'll take a moment to share that it might get harder for a district like Lincoln. If they find that they're struggling to meet student needs, and even with increased expenditures, if the quality of services, again, gets diminished, the financial exposure gets increased, plus it can cost more to provide those services at the diminished level of quality. So when a district is high cost and it's struggling with delivering services, it gets less attractive for the receiving district to say, hey, we can absorb you with those costs, with that risk. So I just thought it might be helpful to point that out. It's kind of a challenging downward spiral. The harder it gets to fulfill the mission that you're required to fulfill, the harder it is to get out of that and be absorbed somewhere else, or be incorporated somewhere else. Yes, I forget.
I'm sorry, just to clarify though, with Lincoln in particular, have we decided whether they are advised to vote on this merger, so they could, if we include them in the vote on this merger, then they wouldn't have to go through all that process, they would just be part of the merger.
You are right. Yep. So if the options for joining an existing district are clear, that's a perfect segue to an update on the state board meeting. Yes, I won't vote.
So would they have to do that merger study thing to combine with Ripton, which is their desired path? Or is there just some magic sprinkled on all that?
If they're being assigned to the same supervisory union, the state board of ed just makes it so.
Okay.
And the supervisory union is formed and they coordinate on those supervisory union services. If they wanted to merge and form a unified union and have one board and one budget, and they'd have to one would have to vote to join the other and go through that process, or they'd have to do a merger study. But I don't think their intent is to merge school districts. I think their wish is to be in a supervisory union together and perhaps with other districts to have the economy of scale, or more of an economy of scale to offer those services. All right, so the State Board of Ed meeting update. I know some of you are able to either watch it live or perhaps watch the video. There was a presentation by the MAUSD chair and superintendent, and remarks by the Addison Northwest chair and superintendent, and then remarks by our co-chairs. The State Board of Ed was provided with the video, a link to your video before the meeting. When we learned we didn't have as much time as we wanted, we adapted quickly. And what I would say is that every member who spoke about the presentation, which was almost all of the State Board of Ed members, was very complimentary of your thorough and thoughtful study. There were compliments about your work to ensure community and stakeholder engagement and to get that voice in the process. They were very appreciative of the information and context for their upcoming decisions that they need to make around supervisory union services in the region. And there was quite a bit of discussion about the approval process by the board and how we could handle things given the timeline if they wanted to request changes to the articles of agreement. So I'll speak to that in just a minute, but they are prepared to receive a report and recommendation in July on the 20th. And we'll talk about timing because I have that on the agenda because there's a lot of moving parts there. But before I talk about timing, I wanted to say that there was also a specific area of comment about Lincoln. And State Board of Ed members expressed a preference that Lincoln be included as advisory, which you have already prepared for and decided to do, pending any further information from Lincoln. You know, again, the State Board of Ed was conveying concern that despite the well-intended efforts and the hard work that people are doing, the needs of students, especially the most vulnerable, may not be addressed, perhaps cannot be addressed adequately in an organization of that size. So they felt that there was value to voters of Lincoln having an opportunity to vote on joining this merger if it's ultimately brought to voters and if it's formed. So as Erica inferred, there are actually for Lincoln potentially 3 options. One of them would be through your articles of agreement to join as an advisory district now. So the other thing that was happening time-wise was there was discussion, as I said, about the state board being able to give feedback and engage with you if they had requests for changes to the articles of agreement. And with respect to what is J, which was the timeline considerations for a local vote with state and federal elections, went to the State Board of Ed meeting thinking that we needed to have a warning ready for the federal voting timeline, which is 45 days prior to November 8th. And there was, so there's a lot of urgency for getting things resolved in July so that we need to meet that deadline. Want to be clear up front, first and foremost, that July is still the target deadline for getting where we want to be, you know, what you want considered by the State Board of Ed, we recommended today. But I learned this afternoon, not long before I hopped in my car to drive here, that we cannot do this election, a local election, on a timeline other than the one prescribed in statute. The good news is that should not be a significant challenge for town clerks any more than, of course, it's always hard work for them to run any election, especially one with many moving parts, multiple ballots and things like that. But there was worry expressed by town clerks about if they got a request for a federal ballot and mailing those early, and then our ballot becomes, then they kind of have to backtrack and remail and it gets complicated. That should not be a problem because all of the November election ballots are being mailed from the Secretary of State's office. So while it is important and complicated work for them, they really only have to manage the local election like they would under normal circumstances. So, so that's what we're working on.
Every federal ballot is being mailed to our houses, whether that's whether or not, so.
That's correct. That's correct. For this November 8th election. So we'll discuss it when we get to item 8 on the agenda. July meeting date. The co-chairs discussed in order to be responsive to State Board of Ed feedback, we're wondering if perhaps there was any interest in scheduling a special committee meeting concurrent with the State Board of Ed meeting, so that if they said, hey, we really would like you to consider changes to the language in Article 14B, let's say, you would have the opportunity to consider it and respond in a formal way. So we'll discuss that, and then we can check on people's availability on July 20th, if there's an interest. I don't know exactly what time it is, but I would expect it to be, yes, in the morning before 1. You know, there might be, I would estimate an hour, hour and a half window-ish where we might want to try and gather on the 20th or be available to gather on the 20th virtually and respond to that. There is a special meeting being scheduled by the State Board of Ed in August, and if everything, you know, if necessary, the state board would consider having this on the agenda on the 20th, but if we can get it done, or in August rather, not the 20th, we can get it done in July, that would be their preference and would position you best to do all the things that we need to do in terms of drafting articles and all of that. So that is G and J. Unless there are other questions, and then the other updates are from superintendents and Mary Kate, or Pat and Mary Kate.
Great. Do we want to move, are there any questions for Tracy? All of that? We want to move to H, which would be superintendent's update on a conversation with Secretary French.
Sure. So I think as we knew, I think the conversation happened here that we were going to, Sheila and I were going to have a conversation with Secretary French. She reached out, wanting to have an opportunity to hear from us and kind of be brought up to speed a little bit about the ongoings in the region. It was a great conversation. I think the takeaways, Sheila and I had a chance to debrief after the conversation just to kind of see if we sort of read the situation the same way, which we did. Essentially, that conversation there was a great emphasis placed on the Starksboro withdrawal. The primary interest from the secretary, so process-wise, the secretary is going to make a recommendation to the state board, and the state board ultimately makes a decision about what to do in terms of supervisory union boundaries, in terms of what structure a withdrawing town or school district would, kind of shape that would take. The driving interest from the secretary, and I think this is a very keen interest of the state board as well, is whatever decision is going to be recommended by the secretary and ultimately decided by the board, the interest is that there's stability in the region for a long time. So they're not going to make a decision that keeps the region unstable or in an uncertain place. So in an ideal situation from a merger perspective, which is the context that we're in tonight, the ideal is Starksboro doesn't withdraw. It sort of keeps intact the concept of merger. And the ideal again would be that the state board and the secretary feel like there's harmony in the region around this concept of merger and everyone's satisfied by that. And no one's going to threaten to withdraw down the road if that's the direction it goes. I'm not sure whether or not we'll be able to achieve that. And so that leaves the secretary and the state board in a precarious place because they need to make a decision that they think is going to create stability. The takeaway was that both Sheila and I perceived should Starksboro succeed in continuing their withdrawal process, there is a high probability, maybe even likely, that a supervisory union will be created. The contents of that supervisory union is not exactly certain. An option would be a supervisory union that contains the district of Addison Northwest and the district of MAUSD, and the district of Starksboro and Lincoln and Ripon. Just sort of drawing a supervisory union boundary around those districts and making that multi-district supervisory union. There was a question at the state board meeting, and it sort of dovetails with this around, does that negate a merger? And the answer is no. Addison Northwest and MAUSD could still merge. And instead of being two districts in a multi-district supervisory union, there would be one district in this multi-district supervisory union. So that was the gist of the takeaway. And again, the idea is where the state board is coming from, and they've been really clear on this, and where the secretary is coming from is they're not interested in taking a preferred structure, which is the supervisory district, right? And making it a less preferred structure, which is the supervisory union. However, if they feel that's the only action they can take that they think is going to protect students, then they're prepared to do that for that reason.
Comment, like, it feels like that's a protection of one group of students and not the rest of the students. And I would hope that that perspective is there. That
think
seems like a sacrifice of every other kid, except for
I don't
potentially
disagree.
a certain population in Starkborough or Lincoln.
I think the challenge for the state board is where their authority lies. Their authority really is in drawing supervisory boundaries. They can't create a district. They can't, so they're limited in what they can do to, in their mind, protect students. And it's essentially limited to creating supervisory unions to help create some efficiency to ensure programming and support.
So if the rest of us can't pay for everything at some point, then what do they do? Like, they draw a bigger amount, like, I don't understand.
Just pay more in taxes.
Right,
Pay ever more in taxes. They don't actually have taxes. They just draw this.
So if they decide that that is the best structure to go forward with one district for those 3 towns and one district for the merge, as Northwest is kind of. If we go through all of this as a merge, we can't refuse to be in that supervisory.
And we can certainly express our opinion about being placed in a supervisory union, but the ultimate decision lies with the state board, and we wouldn't have authority to exit a supervisory. And I would say in that scenario, if that plays out, and again, there are so many variables, it's hard to really know, but I think that is a very real possibility. From my perspective, a merger is still beneficial, right? Some of the savings, like we wouldn't necessarily realize the central office efficiencies because of the complexities of that sort of, I think I've heard it referred to as a spaghetti diagram of governance, right? So that there's nothing efficient about that governance model. However, from the secondary perspective, some of the opportunities would still exist in the merger of the 2 districts. So there would still be good reason to continue considering that, even if that's a district within a supervisory union. They're still much more efficient than current.
What's in it for Starksboro, Lincoln, and Ripon in that arrangement?
So what's in it for? So I think there's some recognition of the challenge that even a sort of mountain supervisory union, as it's been described, of Starksboro, Lincoln, and Ripon, there's some concern that will still be too small to create efficiencies, ability to find staffing, afford staffing, et cetera. So what's in it from I think from the secretary's perspective and from the state board's perspective, as I understand it, is they would benefit from being under the umbrella of a supervisory union and those central office efficiencies.
So protect them from having one of their schools closed?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think one would say yes, in the sense that the Starksboro community would have a school board that oversees its K-12 education, and most notably their elementary school. Same with Lincoln, same with Ripton. However, if their small size in their district isn't sustainable even within a supervisory union, and they just can't continue forward, that could risk the future of their sustainability of their school. And what that means, who knows, what options they might exercise at that point, is a question mark. So on the one hand, yes, it would feel like a protection. And on the other hand, the risk associated with being your own really small district is not absent.
I don't want to put you on the spot, Patrick, but
Comes with the job. Okay.
seeing we're voting on this tonight, I'm assuming I don't feel alone. I think it just dramatically shifts how I feel about the vote we're about to take. Would you be able to elucidate some of those benefits that still remain if this goes where all signs and neon lights seem to be pointing?
Yeah. So the vast majority of the savings we're projecting come from efficiencies created at the secondary level. All of those realities could still be realized in a merger between the two districts. And what that does is ensures that we have sufficient funding, but also sufficient numbers of students to provide the kind of programs we want. When we get to the point where there are 3 students in an AP English class at Mount Abe and 3 students in an AP English class at Virgins, perhaps neither of those courses are going to run because we can't afford to have a teacher tied up for 3 students. The cost per student, if you think about it that way, is really high, and that is hard to afford. Whereas if all 6 students were in one high school, you could have one AP English class, and now those same 6 students would be receiving that opportunity at half the cost of 2 courses with 3 in each. So affordability and enough students to have the academic and co-curricular programming that we want to provide for our students. To me, that's still the benefit of merger
So it's
within supervisory.
a step towards dealing with the secondary school merger, whereas if we don't do it, we're still behind in that part of the process.
Yeah, I would characterize it as we would get most of the benefits of the merger we've been discussing, but not all, if we merge districts within a supervisory.
So I guess the state board seems fixated on keeping Matty district. With a wild card Ripton, and I don't hear any conversation that they are going to draw Middlebury back into the conversation. And the other thing that I wonder about is there are supervisory unions that at least Ripton courted without success. And why they wouldn't be seriously considering revisiting those supervisory unions as opposed to deconstructing that.
I think that is also a possibility. And again, I don't want to speak for the secretary of the state board. I'm giving you my read of the tea leaves based on a lot of things that are sort of in motion. And I think a lot of it depends, right? And that's where I think it's a different circumstance if Starksboro withdraws, and then you have Starksboro and Lincoln and Ripton all with a date of FY24, right? July 1 of 23. That's a very different scenario than if Starksboro doesn't complete its process. If Ripton chooses to push it back a year, or it goes back into ACSD, both are options. That then leaves Lincoln out on an island of their own. I think the state board and the secretary's recommendation would be different if it's Lincoln alone than it is if it's Lincoln and Ripton, than it is if it's Lincoln and Starksboro, than it is if it's Lincoln and Ripton and Starksboro. So I think how those three kind of materialize and what they are pursuing to be operational, which I think we'll know in the fall, I think will drive the action the secretary would recommend the state board might take.
And there's a vote, is Starksboro, the follow-up vote with Starksboro by the towns, is that scheduled yet?
That is scheduled for the primary date. Is that the 9th? August 9th?
And does that happen before the state board's meeting where they consider readjusting boundaries?
The boundaries is September. So they'll have that information. And that was part of the reason for tonight's sort of MAUSD and Mary Kate joining the Starksboro Select Board, was to understand, are they moving forward with pursuing withdrawal, or will they exercise the article that passed that gave them authority to stop the withdrawal process? Basically, do the articles of agreement satisfy their concern? Because the MAUSD board needs to know, are we going out to educate the other towns about the potential impact, or are they not withdrawing, and that isn't work that needs to happen? So, and we got the answer tonight, so now we know that there's no intent at this point to stop the withdrawal process based on what they know today.
But let's start with the towns of Lincoln and Starksboro and Ripon. Say they all band together because they want to leave and do their own thing, and then the state forces them into our district. So people from Ripon might be having to bus people from Ripon to Virgins.
So there's lots of, so the answer is yes, I suppose that's a might.
Well,
But if they're secondary choice district, they might not, they could choose to designate a high school, it
Oh,
might not
okay.
be Virgins.
okay.
So there are a lot of uncertainties there, and there's some latitude in the way in which Ripon would want to handle that as a school district that serves their K-12 students.
Okay. So it's not like a foregone conclusion if there's a supervisory district that their high school kids would be coming to our high school.
We can only dream of foregone conclusions. There are too many variables for anything to be foregone.
Financially, who would be responsible for the transportation from Ripton, Lincoln, and Starksboro to Mount Ave, Virgins?
So in a supervisory union, transportation is centralized, and there would be a transportation cost for the supervisory union. And then there would be, and then there's an assessment formula where each district is responsible for paying their sort of fair share of the centralized costs. So in a supervisory union, no one votes on the centralized expenses. Each district is basically billed, which they have no option but to pay their share based on their average daily membership. It's kind of a count of students. And it's so whatever percentage Ripton would have if they were in a supervisory union with all of us, whatever percentage of their students they have is the percentage of the supervisory union costs, including transportation, business office, curriculum, all the centralized special education, all the centralized expenses.
But the SU board would vote on that budget, and the SU board would be made up of what?
The SU board, as it's written out in statute, and there's, I think, some mechanism to adjust this, but as it's written in statute, each district gets 3 members. So a Ripton school district would get 3 members, and a merged MAUSD as Northwest district would get 3 members.
And Lincoln 3.
Presumably, there'd be an interest in
Starksboro 3.
petitioning to change that.
This is supposed to create stability?
So if we were in this, I'm having trouble with supervisory union.
Yep.
Would that possibly change the outlook for our new weighted student so that we could get more money from the state?
There's not enough students, I think, to change that very much,
No,
right?
but they're more rural and they.
But the average in,
So each,
Right, so it wouldn't impact the overall,
Doesn't help us at all.
it doesn't help.
so the funding formula is district by district.
So they're just,
So, right, so so it's a cost per pupil for the students in the district. So in the example we've been talking about, a Ripton school district would have its own budget, its own cost per pupil. And it would have its own voters go and vote on that cost per pupil and the associated tax rate. Part of the cost they have to factor into their cost per pupil are those central office services that are billed to them, which again, they'd be far less costly doing it that way. Like what we would bill in that supervisory union structure to Ripton is a whole lot less than what they would spend if they were trying to do it their own, or even the smaller supervisory union for the mountain SU. So that's the benefit essentially to those outlying towns.
How would this not create a cascade of schools trying to withdraw from their unions in order to get a really great deal on their education?
So that is a concern. So I had an opportunity to express from the MAUSD perspective why we wouldn't want to be deconstructed and put back into an SU with the state board. And that was one of the reasons was what's to keep other towns from pursuing this? A response might be, and they didn't really get it back and forth. We really just had an opportunity to share our thoughts and they listened. But the response might have been the threshold that has been set in 727 sets a pretty high bar to say, you need to be really pretty convincing that you can do this successfully, appropriately so, right? This is not something to take lightly to withdraw. So I think that's something they have to say that may prevent the floodgates from opening.
But the state board does not have the right to deny it.
They can't deny it. Basically, if the state board doesn't think a town can withdraw successfully, they can't say you're not allowed to withdraw. The way I understand the statute, which again is 180 pages long, so don't like hold me to this, but as I understand it, if the state board doesn't think it can happen successfully, the town is required to make a public notice that the state board has said they don't think we can do this successfully, or it's unlikely, I think is the term that's used. And then should the townspeople get a petition of 5% of the electorate to overturn the vote to withdraw, then that process could be initiated. But otherwise, they can continue forward with their withdrawal, even though it's been made public that the state board doesn't think it could be that successful. So another way to sort of kind of tie the hands of the state board.
Well, Lincoln and the state board are at odds now, so what difference would another town take?
you just threaten to sue them and they'll do it.
I don't understand why they, if they were this afraid of this, why they let Lincoln go and why it isn't a conflict and that the town, the other 4 towns allowed it, which seems like a ridiculous vote that knowing what the cost is to the other 4 towns, I would imagine more people would be like, I wouldn't have voted that way.
So I think the circumstances are really different now. When Lincoln was going through their process, what we knew then, what we understood the impact to be, what the impact really would be if it's just Lincoln is very different than Lincoln and Starksboro. Certainly now in this context of the potential with the supervisory union, et cetera. And I think it's important, and the state board spoke, I would say, pretty strongly to this. They're sort of allowing Lincoln to become a district wasn't a show of their belief that Lincoln can do this successfully. The statute basically says, as long as the state board is convinced that the students in Lincoln will be able to attend a school that meets the education quality standards, then they essentially have to allow that district to form and the town to withdraw. That doesn't necessarily mean that they believe the Lincoln School Board and school district will operate a school that provides those services. In the event that they can't create a school that meets the education quality standards, they know, because it's a requirement, that the Lincoln School District asks schools in the region, do you have enough space for our students if this doesn't go well? And of course, the answer is yes, because all of our schools are at half capacity basically. So like Bristol could take Lincoln twice over itself. Each of the other 4 elementary schools in MAUSD could take Lincoln in and still wouldn't exceed prior enrollment levels, not even set historic enrollment rates. So that sort of gives you a perspective of how much space we have in our schools. And so the state board knows there's plenty of room in schools close by. If things go south in Lincoln, those students are going to have a place to go, and therefore it satisfies that information for them. And 4 of the 7 felt they needed to say yes. And others have seen these, so if I'm misinterpreting or whatnot, feel free to.
Ironically, make it potentially more likely that a school like Lincoln could be closed than if they were in a larger district.
The risk is potentially fast tracking school closure in their efforts to, above all else, keep schools open.
But that's a painful process, and you were saying that the adjacent schools have the capacity, and State Board of Ed knows that, but they won't or don't have and the ability to tell Lincoln to send their kids somewhere else. The only thing they're gonna do is still adjacent SD or full into other issues.
I am curious if a school is found to not be able to meet education quality standards, what authority the state board has. I don't know that I fully understand that.
Thank you.
Is there any other questions for? We're a little behind schedule, so.
Okay.
Swirling right
And I hope, like, so this is, it's so complicated and it's so interconnected in so many ways with so many variables. And what I feel I am responsible to do for you and others is tell you how I see it. Doesn't mean it's gonna go the way I see it, and I'm not trying to misinterpret or misrepresent anyone else. But we're talking about some really big, important decisions, and I have a lens that not everybody has, and I feel obligated to offer that lens as you're weighing this, and others are weighing lots of other decisions. So hopefully it's received in the way it's intended, both for folks here in person and outside of this as a televised.
So very basic question, because there's so many unknowns to all of this. If we tonight vote to move forward with a merger, and then this all happens with multiple districts, can we then come September say that was a really bad idea and we don't want that on the ballots?
So once it's warned and it's out there, it's out there.
Yeah.
The education that happens
Could change.
prior to the vote is subject to change.
Ultimately, people make that decision in November.
Okay.
I mean, are there ramifications if we, as a committee today, propose the merger and then we decide
Educate the other
later
direction.
that we don't support it? Is that, are we somehow obligated, like, are we obligated by law to continue to support our proposal individually, or are we free to change our mind
Not individually, we would be as a committee.
as a committee? Yeah.
And I would just offer again, from my perspective, I don't right now see a scenario moving forward where merger still isn't the better option for students. It may not be as good as we wish it could have been, but it's still better than the not merged.
I just want to say that we haven't really fully explored what other options are for our students, especially at the high school level. I feel like we have talked about there are lots more options we could have. Like we've talked about AP classes where there's only 3. When I know at the high school level upper gens, that can be hit or miss from year to year. And there's ways that we've, like some years we have 2 AP Langs that are full, 2 whole courses full. This coming year, we have a huge AP bio class coming up. Some years we have a small calculus class, and then other years it's a lot of students. So it's hit or miss on the year. So I really feel like we haven't explored the different ways to combine schools and look at how to use our resources. We haven't looked at, should we bus kids for half a day here? And then the other half a day they spend at Virgins and vice versa. I feel like there's a lot of using resources that we haven't explored. And that's one reason I got on this committee, was to look at that and see if there was a way to use our resources in a different way. So yeah, I feel like a merger would have helped with that, but I'm not sure it's the only way that we could have done that. And I have to say also that I was thinking about this when we were talking about Ripton and Lincoln having, 3 members on their board, if it's a supervisory union. If we are each our own district like we are now, we would have 3 voting members here for MAUSD and 3 at Virgins. So then there's 6 members. Whereas if we are all one merged district, that's 3 members, voting members. So just want to.
Well, if we weren't merged, they would put Starksboro, Lincoln, and Ripton into MAUSD, and Virgins would be out of it, right? Or would they make the supervisory union, all of us, regardless of if we merge or not?
I can't say what they would or wouldn't do. They have the authority to create a supervisory union boundary that includes Addis Northwest, whether we're merged.
Right, so I'm just saying,
Yeah.
we're losing our voting, our members.
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
So I'm just pointing out what I was thinking.
Yeah,
Unless
Well,
the
we are-
process is undertaken.
We
to-
are gonna discuss pros and cons, like.
But those are what I was thinking when we were
Yeah,
discussing.
yeah.
He was throwing out his opinion, so I thought I should just, that was in my head.
I'm thinking we should do, well, you have to do the legal review.
I
Well, I
just-
don't wanna skip, yeah, okay.
I want to show you the suggested legal changes and get your support with them. And I wouldn't table that until after a pros and cons discussion, because you've already started it. And we're actually whispering about, should we just open it up and let people go into that? But I was worried about you doing that if we didn't address Article 14 and how you wanted to handle language defining school closure. And I would like to be able to share my screen. I'm going to try. Can you enable screen sharing for me?
He's.
The last bit, I apologize that I didn't get this to you in advance. I got the last bits of legal advice right before, as I was sitting here at the table this evening, so.
And it should be stuff, Tracy.
Okay. So, just so you know, so that I could work with legal counsel, we created a separate document. So this is not shared online, but I can make it available to folks after tonight. We use the traditional format to strike through proposed changes and underline, delete, strike through additions and underline deletions. And so the first thing is your legal counsel suggested a little more legal language. Sorry, I'm not driving well here. A little more language, legal specific language regarding the necessary districts and what they are comprised of to better deal with Lincoln's withdrawal and mostly to deal with Starksboro's, wherever Starksboro is at the date
Of the vote.
of the vote. Yes. So I have to add the date of November 8th there. So it's not a change of your intent, it's just a little more legally specific language defining the towns that comprise the member districts. And the same is true for Article 2, the advisable districts. we had changed it to the Lincoln School District is advisable, and legal counsel proposes adding 2 options for how to handle Starksboro, depending on where it is as of the date of the vote. I'm gonna zoom down. Article 5B, also, all the changes are really technical legal changes except for 14B. And so Article 5B adds some language to clarify the consideration of advisable districts if contract negotiations are needed. And just a little clarification of the wording right there around employees covered under the terms of the bargaining agreement. To clarify that phrase, you'll see lots of places where we've said forming entities in the articles, and regularly we're adding reference to the advisable districts in case they join throughout the document. A little more cleaning up of language, specifying that employee association who does the negotiating, not staff members. And this sentence was deleted because it's already stated above and was redundant there. Just adding the words of operation and the nature of the decisions that we're addressing in that article, which is the assignment of employees. Whoops. This is the section that addresses employees not covered by a collective bargaining agreement. And so clarifies that instead of just saying, starting with the new board shall honor all contracts. And she recommends just ending at the date instead of until their respective termination dates. Honoring the contracts is enough. No changes, no changes, no changes. Here's just a clarification saying forming entities and advisable districts. Adding advisable districts, adding advisable districts. Our articles of agreement did not have a plan for what happens if Bristol, Lincoln, Moncton, New Haven, or Starksboro towns did not want to receive the property. If we decided to not use it and give it back to the towns, and if the town said no, we just didn't have the thing in there that said, and if they say no, we'll sell it per the terms of the law, which is what we said for every other school. So that's what that addition is. Another good catch. Clarifying the language on that overlap period and just explicitly saying the forming an advisable district cease to exist when their business is completed or on December 31st, whichever occurs first. Adds language to our scenarios for boards. We have a scenario for if Lincoln is and Starksboro is, so they added reference to and Starksboro is. And then here also, if Lincoln is not, but Starksboro is, so it's just the way we had it with reference to Starksboro. And adding language that aligns to what's in H727 and clarifies that the new MAUSD Board of Directors will adjust board membership whenever necessary to conform to the census if there's a change in membership. So if this goes to vote as it is with your board configuration, but Starksboro becomes its own district in 2024 or even 2023, everything you just voted on is still okay, and the new board can just tweak the weights and the board membership, and you'll go on. So it's covered. No changes. Well, adding Starksboro as a reference, but adding to the data vote, just some better legal language referencing the articles of agreement instead of a proposal, and clarifying the advisable districts and towns ultimately choose whether to hold a vote on November 8th. Well, they're school districts if they exist. Cleaning up of language on 13, which is also transition language. It says the same thing, just in a way that the legal counsel is comfortable with. And then the last thing is 14B, supporting and protecting schools. And your legal counsel was clear that the definition of elementary schools is K6, it's defined in law. So we need to keep that in mind. Whoops, sorry, darn it. Can't move my cursor. I would make it set. Now my documents. Being slow. All right, so what she proposes, and this is in part to address just what you've been talking about repeatedly, but again tonight, adding a blurb that while we're talking about elementary as a K6, that the board of directors of the new district has the authority to determine the location of students in grade 6 without the need to present that to the electorate. And that is not considered school closure. So that's a suggestion for dealing with your wish to convey commitment to elementary school, but also clarity that you want them to have the opportunity to do a full middle, proper middle level or best practice middle level program. And then I asked for optional language for your discussion last time around around a definition of school closure. And the suggestion is for the purposes of this section on elementary schools, school closure shall be defined as the district ceases to use the school building for the provision of direct education services for a majority of the grades operated within the building, which is the exact language in 727 and addresses Kevin's question. I think it doesn't prohibit some reconfiguration of grades, but in a currently K6 school, that's 7 grades, an elementary school needs to operate 4 of those grades. Could be K4, it could be 1-5, but it really means the board couldn't do a K3 in one town and a 4-5 in another, or something like that, without electorate approval.
But then we have the language above.
How can those both work? Yeah. Number 4 and number 5.
I couldn't hear what you said.
Oh, sorry. Number 4 says the board will determine the location of the education of students. Oh, I guess just in grade 6. Okay.
Right. And I think I just want to double check. And I'll come back to that. That is all the suggestion changes. So really, I'm hoping you're comfortable with the proposed legal changes and would accept them, and you would, before you did that, tell me how you feel about 14-8 and how you want to handle it.
I just noticed that in the highlighted, or in the state statute, it does say grades operated within the building, and then it specifies in the year 2023 or something. In fact, I didn't know if we should also have a year in there, or just because.
We could say, there's there's a term we use. I think it's date of operation, so the year prior to the first day of operations.
So in the interest of simplicity, if that is state law, then do we really need to include option 5 there?
Well, state law is 1 through K through 6, right? Tracy? Elementary school.
Yes.
State law is K through 6, so we're changing. the
Well,
definition of state law.
You're not really, unless you make this to be, use the school building for the provision of direct. So instead of for a majority of grades, if you said a majority of grades operated, or grades K5. Because this really keeps it K6. And K5, what would that do? It wouldn't change it. It's still gonna be 4 grades because math is math.
Is that definition of like K6 just following the licensure brackets? Isn't that how it goes?
That's true, but there's middle level
There's
license
middle
by
license,
the-
yeah.
But there's other places in law, like around tuition rates and things like that, where elementary is clearly defined, lots of places, now that I think about it, clearly defined as K6, and secondary is defined as 7-12.
That's one of the major considerations, right? So in a 6-8 middle school, it basically 6th graders need to be counted the same or weighted the same, whether they're in a 6-8 middle school or a K6 elementary school.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the significant reasons why it's necessary that it's defined upon. Otherwise, it'd be great to have a 2-9 middle school.
Yeah, but
Really drive those equalized pupil counts up.
I move to accept the changes.
including the optional language.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor to accept the changes. Is there any discussion? Having no discussion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstention? Motion carries. Okay, I think, you what? Oh, yeah. You want to say something?
Yeah, so this kind of goes, Patrick covered it, but it kind of goes back to the update on the Starksboro withdrawal and how it impacts maybe this provision, but the select board said that they don't think they have the authority to withdraw the withdrawal based on the current language that we have. And that if there was language saying that we were not going to, that schools couldn't be closed without a vote then of the town, then they would have the authority to do that. So I just wanted to raise that so everybody knows that in case, I know and I told them we've gone over this a number of times and felt this was the best way to deal with both the interest of towns like Starksboro, who don't want their schools closed and that we don't want schools closed and we don't think this will close schools, but often and it provides a, the child protections, the 4 years plus the 2/3 and 2/3. But I did want to raise that in case that fact makes anyone want to move to change that language.
So they meant in perpetuity.
Well, yeah, if there was language that said, in fact, we didn't have to do it for all the districts, you could just say Starksboro schools won't be closed without a vote of the town. In perpetuity. I don't think you have to say in perpetuity.
Oh, just period.
Just say period. And here's the language. A town elementary school program should not be closed, repurposed, or otherwise terminated for any students in each of the grades K through 6 resident of the town without the approval of the voters of the town.
I thought it said all.
Hmm?
I believe their warning said all, not any. So
Or any students, well, there's the popular warning on it, it says any.
So, thank you for going to that. I think,
Can I just clarify one thing? It's a problem not just with Starksboro. Like Lincoln can't go back and change their things, so, right? Like, is the
Lincoln's
problem
already
better?
withdrawn.
Yeah, I just am curious, if, like, the problem is if, when you say, oh, it's Ripton, Starksboro, and Lincoln, if they are actually able to form something together, then we have a better shot of forming something together separately,
Could happen.
or is that like, I get a little confused over
Yeah, I think.
where's the option where we end up actually, I don't want to say in the driver's seat, but a little bit more in control of our own destiny.
I got the sense, and Patrick, correct me, you got a different sense, but the state board is really concerned that none of those schools are gonna be able to provide services to these qualities, that meet quality standards to the students, unless they're made part of an SD.
But there's room in every school
But they could.
nearby for all three of them. There is a backup plan.
Is that not part of the conversations in the schools though,
Right.
as they withdraw in the towns about how they're going to provide for their students? Isn't that the core of the whole decision?
it's been the
Shouldn't it
wild,
be-
it's been the Wild West to this point, you know. When Lincoln, when it came to town roads for Lincoln, and they had this, you know, Pollyanna view that they're gonna join up with Ripton and live happily ever after. My comment was, yeah, go ahead. You know, and now hearing the state board's concern, and it's not a passing concern, they're obsessed. If you look at the video, they're convinced, even though Lincoln says they've got it under control and Ripton's, they're convinced we can't do it. So all of a sudden, my attitude towards Starksboro leaving has become a whole lot different. And I don't think it's fair to voters to not be aware of that and have those decisions made after they make some assumptions when they go to the polls.
And I would just build off of Mary Kate's statement. I agree, and just add clarity in response to your question, Sarah. From my read, the state board nor the secretary have a high degree of confidence that even Ripton, Lincoln, and Starksboro together in an SU is viable. In which case they wouldn't form that SU, right? Remember, the state board alone has the authority to form a supervisory union. They're not going to form a supervisory union that they don't think will be viable. They will only form a supervisory union that they think will be viable and stable. And that is a bigger SU. Bigger the SU, the greater stability, I think, from the state board and the secretary's perspective. So.
Well, I'm just curious why, or is it another voice to throw out there? What if we all believe they could be? Like, I mean, we've given our side, but if we actually are like, I don't know why you wouldn't give this group a shot first and then let us have another conversation later on. That to me would be, I think, way more comfortable for where all of us are.
We could do that. I think it would be a high bar for a district of 1,300 students who is struggling to make it work to convince the state board that a supervisory union of 400 students is going to be okay.
Yeah.
There was a specific comment made by Chair Olson, I believe, is what are we going to do when in November Lincoln and Starksboro can't hire a superintendent?
Would you say it again?
what are we, the state board? Olson said this, what are we, the state board, gonna do when in November, Lincoln and Rick figure out they can't hire a superintendent?
They can't because they can't afford it or they
Can't
can't
find
find
anybody.
anybody.
Can't find them, you know, who wants to come probably part-time.
He's gonna get assigned to an SU like us. And that's what I want to, I mean, I think it's, I don't know. I know a lot of people feel differently here, but I think it's worth thinking about if we look back at that article, that 14D, the one on the school, the one where the Save Our Schools group gave us the language they want. And is there a compromise we could make that, you know, that basically guaranteed that they would get a vote to close their school? And if that would make them kind of drop this and, you know, get behind joining a merged district rather than play this thing out, and what ends up happening is we get deconstructed and decide as an SU, including them anyways, which is much less preferred. I think we should consider that. Like if that helps it get this through, because I think a lot of people, you know, Lincoln residents, Duxboro residents, they'll likely all vote against this merger for the same ill-advised reasons they voted to withdraw to begin with. So it's probably dead in the water without making a compromise there. It's my feeling on the situation. And the whole deconstruction thing, it's moving backwards. And on a bigger scale, it's probably going to encourage more schools to do the withdrawal thing.
So I would say that even if we change the language, I don't see a lot of support coming from Starksboro, regardless of what the language is. So, you know, that's the other side of that argument.
The other part, I mean, I don't know what to do with this, but I don't understand from the State Board of Ed's side why they're allowing, why they allow the withdrawal, but then there's this backup of, okay, we'll assign you to an SU. You can't, if it doesn't make it work, they seem skeptical it's going to work. But what they'll do is assign them to an SU. But they're not saying, well, if you can't make it to school where your school's closed and your students are getting assigned to this SU that can absorb your students, I think that second would be maybe more of a reality check for those towns that want to withdraw and say, hey, can we really do this? Should we be moving forward?
Instead of giving them.
Instead of just
equal
saying,
voting
well,
power?
we'll save you and these other towns will absorb you against their, against what's best for the students they serve in their district.
That's where I think it really boils down to the state board's authority. I think when they allowed Lincoln to form as a district, they did so because they didn't feel they had authority to say they couldn't, because they sort of checked the boxes. And again, the state board's authority is create supervisory units, draw those boundaries.
Right. But they can't create a district. They can just create a supervisory union. But they can't close a school. They couldn't close a school that is not.
That's the question. I don't know the answer to that. I think that's a legitimate question. If a school can't meet education quality standards, what authority does the state board and or secretary of education have? I'm not sure.
Erica?
So, well, in that last point, the law says no school will be closed in the next 2 years, right? So, no, they can't close the school, but maybe
For-
after that.
For districts that formed under the new law.
Oh, right.
There's a question about districts that formed under the prior law. If that
So-
stands or not.
If this scenario goes ahead and we merge, and then the state creates a supervisory union, is it possible that like Ferrisburg sees, oh, those other places that just have elementary schools in their district get 3 people on the board? We would like that too. We're gonna lead.
Right, this is
Yeah.
Right,
the
so,
problem.
so,
You could have 10 districts.
right, so then it undoes everything from Act 46.
That's the risk. But again, it can be changed. Like the statute is 3 per district. I'm not exactly clear what the process is, but that can be changed to have a better representation on the SU board.
And so there's the SU board, which is for all the shared budget. And then each district has its own board as well.
Correct.
So,
On board and on budget.
My line of thinking was just, is there a way that joining our merged district that we're proposing could possibly give a town like Starksboro more assurance that their school is not going to be closed than if they left it to the powers of the State Board of Ed that might assign them to an SU or close their school. I'm surprised that the state board doesn't maintain that authority to do that. in school funds.
Carol, from my meeting with the select board, I would say that Starksboro, if that language is changed, would stay in the MAUS district, but I don't hear a lot of support for the merger.
Because it's not really about the school, it's about loss of local control. The school is just a symbol.
Was there originally like an Act 46 that you had to have a certain number of students in your school district to be viable, and that was part of the law? Like, I don't, that's, I guess, what I'm confused about.
Started at 1,000, I think dropped to 900 before it was done.
So if you're at 900, and just, that's what I don't understand, how a school district could be made that have less than 900 students in it at this
Because
point.
it's not a school district, it's a supervisory unit.
No, but Lincoln was made a school
Oh,
district
yeah,
with
you're
much
right.
less than 900
Right.
students.
Because that law no longer applies. That guided the Act 46 merger. And it is a benchmark that should be used, but it's the state board of ed does not have the power to say. Shall be in the district of that size.
It's important to emphasize perception I get about how handcuffed the state board feels sometimes about what they can. There's what they might wish they could do, and there's what they feel they have authority to do, and they're not always the same thing. So I don't want to characterize actions or decisions the state board has made or will make in the future as that's necessarily what they want or think is in the best interest. It's they're acting, working hard in complicated ways to work within their authority.
I wonder if we should schedule another meeting. I mean, I don't know, are people feeling confident in voting tonight, or we're gonna go over the pros and cons, but I don't know, I'm hearing
Is
a lot of.
anything gonna change in another 2 weeks? Because,
No,
like, I don't
but
think the information is gonna change, right?
but you
We
need
need
the
more
opportunity, to articulate the pros and cons, I think.
I think we should articulate the pros and cons, so then we can at least think about it. And I always like to think of things through. I think having the pros and cons list will help that.
All right, let's start with cons. And I think maybe we can just go around the room and state. That's good. I'm looking at Ed. He's supposed to shake his head and say yes.
Cons of a merger.
What are your thoughts?
I'm sorry, I'm in the camp that it would engender efficiencies that I can't ignore. And especially around the quality of education that students will receive. I'll say it's this, I did the master schedule for this building for 10 years. And singleton courses were always a tough nut to crack. And when it came down to it, me and the school and the department heads and the principal had to sit down and decide which courses were going to fly, which ones weren't. And for the students who in February, juniors say, or their senior courses the next year, they need more opportunities that they can bank on to get themselves ready to graduate. They can't say, well, I'm gonna sign up for this course, but it might not fly. That's not fair. We should minimize that if we can. And we should also offer as broad a range of course opportunities if we can to prepare the students for life after high school. So the cons, I wish it was all 10 towns.
I agree with a lot of what Ed said. I think one thing that people keep harping back to is the transportation, and not having a very clearly outlined method for how we'll stay within that guideline of how long rides will be, not increasing rides.
I think the first thing is I'm not sure that there is an actual cost savings over a long period of time. So I think there's an initial cost savings. I've looked over the notes from our October 19th meeting when Elizabeth Jennings came. I think it was Lloyd, thank you. And I'm just looking at that last chart over and over again when it just all that tax chart was like this and it meets again at 7 years. I'm just like, that's hard sell when you're not seeing a huge tax saving in the long run after. And I know you see one at the initial start. And the other thing is that we really didn't explore other options for student opportunities at the high school level. So I feel like that's a con in my eyes. There's one other thing. I didn't have time to jot it down.
Pros, I would agree with everything that's been said so far. I just would add that I really think we're stronger together. Cons, I am concerned about that potential Frankenstein's version of an SU creating some fairly imbalanced voting ratio and all that. So that is a big concern from a governance standpoint.
Yeah, my pro is I really enjoyed the process of working with problem solving people and trying to create something better, and just think we need to continue trying to be stronger together and unified as a larger body that is just looking out for more kids. And the con is literally, for me right now, just not actually having the control of that with the state board decision making, and not really knowing how to plan to pivot. So we don't end up with the spaghetti model, because that is a terrible model.
Thank you. Yeah, so the con for me in the articles is the concern about the Starksboro piece. And, you know, I kind of voted against this language that I think is really good language and really will protect small schools. I think the board as a whole adopted some really strong protection for small schools and keeping them open. I voted against it mainly because Starksboro's basically said, you know, we're gonna leave if you don't have this other language that says you can never close it without us voting for it. And yet, I think that it's vitally important on the pro side to have a merger, because really what Ed said, providing opportunities for students. And while tax rates, you know, over time aren't gonna go down, if there are significant savings, and without it, if we try to provide similar opportunities, the tax rates are just going to skyrocket. And so that chart of the tax rates, I think is a little deceptive in terms of there are real savings. Particularly, right, we have one administration. And then, having courses with enough number of students that kids are participating. So it's the opportunities for students that at the middle and high school level that I just think is so crucial.
I agree wholeheartedly with that. I think it seems very clear to me that if we merged, students would have a richer educational experience. And possibly also the teachers and other staff would feel better supported and have more options to teach things that they love as well. So I see huge benefit to that in secondary schools. I think one con, I agree with Carol, I'm concerned about the bus times and adjusting the school starting times and end times, but I do feel like that could be overcome. And then in terms of the supervisory union, I guess my feelings about that are complicated because in some ways, my impression of the districts that are leaving is that they are economically the lower end. Not, okay. So I'm concerned about equity. And so I do that very much concerns me that I don't want to lose track of that. We are better together, and that includes a bigger field of people, a wider community. And so if we sometimes have to pay more money to get poor kids bused from further away, then maybe that's okay. I don't want to object to that. I feel like equity is really important. But at the same time, I feel like equity of representation is also important. So if certain, I don't know, like if each elementary school in certain places get to have their own school board, I would want my local elementary schools to have their own school board too, and that would seem unfair to me if it doesn't go that way. But yeah, anyway, I guess. Okay.
Well, pros, I do think we'd be stronger together and better poised to meet future challenges, serve students well. And remember, you'd have the possibility of enhancing programming and services for students by combining middle and high, expand the peer group and opportunities for those older students. Some cost efficiencies there with the combined schools. Be some cost efficiencies, consolidating the central offices. You have a more efficient governance structure than if we were forced into an SU, if we were deconstructed. And I know we can't entirely control that, but I feel like there has to be less chance of being deconstructed the larger we are. Get all the towns in it, we merge, there's probably less chance of state changing that. And you'd have an opportunity to begin a new legacy and provide more stability. The cons, I think, changing identity, there's a feeling of loss or diminished legacy with the high schools possibly changing schools, getting transported further and out of town for Bristol and Virginia residents, for middle and high, moving job sites for employees, and less local control.
So we're doing pros and cons?
Sure. Yeah, we'll go back to them, don't worry.
So for pros, I've got cost containment, no cost savings, but cost avoidance. Increases in local taxes will be more effectively contained. Continued in declining enrollment means less state aid, creates the need to change. It should be recognized that growth necessary to increase student population is not in process in the area. Area constraints include remoteness to urban centers, lack of public water and sewer. The rate and scope of growth necessary, as it can be seen in Williston and South Burlington, reverse population decline will likely not be embraced in either existing district. Another pro is enhanced programming. So this has been discussed, right sizing classes, not underutilized classes, greater peer groups, better environment for supportive coaches and intervention. And continue to improve coordination of elementary school preparation for middle and high school, so that those students are more equally prepared. Recognition of school choice. Board weighting voted is more representative of town population than current configurations. Larger staff pool, which will allow for greater flexibility in assigning staff where needed, both year to year and unforeseen needs during the year. Provided a larger number of positions, giving teachers greater security with inductions, given their seniority status. Process for school closure, if necessary, that involves everyone, ensures real need for action through supermajorities of the board action and district voting. Liabilities. We are changing things. Change of this magnitude is hard. There will be difficult and messy transitions. Multi-year plans should minimize issues. Buy-in by the players should minimize issues. Transportation could involve longer bus times. I'm not convinced otherwise. Likely require change in school schedules. Either Bristol or Virginia will host the high school and the other the middle school if campuses are set up that way. Where the high school is situated will be a community focal point for the district because middle school extracurricular activities do not seem to draw the attention as they do for high school. Virginia has 2 gyms, not 1. Not Bristol has a larger area population that would be have better access to school activities if it was sited there. Cost avoidance is not significant. FY23 budget projected at 50.7 million. The reductions for central office, high school, and middle school, an estimated 3.6 million. That's like a 7.2% reduction in cost. Cost containment may need to continue if student projections continue to decline past the projections. Community engagement appears to be overwhelmingly from individuals with agenda for uncompromising town goal for town schools, resulting in a very biased perspective. This can be illustrated through this thought exchange summary presented on June 5th, page 18, differences town, where 82% of the respondents stated that concern. Smaller towns feel like they will have less voice or influence. Any loud voices, at least on the MAUSD side, come from small towns that expect to disproportionately affect outcomes. So,
For those of you that wrote those, there are cons. Dustin, you might as well email those to me. It's okay if you didn't, I'm taking notes, but when you have a long list, I can't keep up.
I don't know if I have much to add. I mean, the major pro for me is enhanced programming for high schoolers. We're at a point after Jen's where I'm afraid that I'm gonna have to send my kid elsewhere if he wants to take BP classes throughout his high school career, because I just don't know if we're gonna have to cut, and he's not gonna be able to get what he needs. And I know there are community members who have teachers in other districts who are thinking about sending their kids to other schools because they have the option, and I want them to be able to send their kids to school in our district. I want our kids to have the same opportunities or equal opportunities, I guess, equitable opportunities to pursue what they want in high school. The major cons are, I don't know whether we think this is a good idea or not, that we can convince the community. People can see the facts and decide they don't care. This is, our two schools are rivals and this school is falling down, and like, it seems to not matter as much what the facts are. Like, facts versus beliefs is a really hard fight right now. And I worry that we're not going to be able to win in a couple months, even if that's what we want to do. And also, the whole spaghetti state situation is very concerning. Because if we go through all this to save money and then the state just says, oh, by the way, you're not going to save money, and also you get less voting power, that's like really demoralizing. So just like it sounds.
I have a few too, and then I'll get to, one of the cons that has weighed heavy on me is that, and I've said it before, I feel like ANWSD has done what MAUSD is going through now or proposed. And I really wish that maybe this conversation would be happening in a year or two when that was already completed. Because I think a lot of our effort has been on this and the repercussions of what happens should this town do this or whatever. So part of me that's a con is that I'm just not sure. There's a lot of uncertainty with that, and that weighs heavy on me. I wish we were both in the same game per se. I'm also have horrible founder syndrome. I do not love the idea of losing, the identity at BUHS. I would be a strong advocate of building a new high school right in New Haven. I'm serious. I don't know. I just think that's kind of what I think of. But it all doesn't boil down to me and what I think. It really would, and this is hard for me because I love Virgins and I just can't imagine, like in my head, and my kids are gonna be gone. It's not gonna affect them at all, except it is, because I got a letter in the mail that we don't have driver's ed next year. So that was the thing. I read that and I'm like, ooh, okay, this is, for us, and we've dealt with teacher reductions. It's a constant thing every year. I don't want to keep wondering what else is going to come that we can't fill or what else we can't find, because I feel like in the end, it's the kids. It's the program. I knew going into this wasn't a cost savings. Any conversation I had, I would have never even let the community think it was, because it's really, to me, it's about the program. It really is about programming, and I wish I had a crystal ball where I could say, you can go to Mount Abe and have woodworking, you can go to Virgins and have CAD, and you can, I think of all these things in my head. I have a great solution for everything, and but I know that as things, just that letter the other day, I was like, oof, it really is starting to hit home for us. I don't know if it's hit home in this area, but I really struggle with Virginia Senior High School, the thought of it and the thought of merging, just because of history. And I guess that's a huge con to me. Like, that is really, I don't know how to preserve that. Those are things I think about, what's really, but I see it. I see it when it came in the mail. I don't know. I just wish there was a perfect solution. So now we got to go to your pros, because we didn't do that, Ed. I'm sorry.
Friends of mine in the community approached me at various times and said, you guys are focusing on the wrong tactic. Instead of merging, focus on bringing more people into the state. And my response is, that's not our charge. And I still see the merger as on the road to managing limited resources to obtain a better outcome for the students. That's what it's really all about. You mentioned driver's ed. It's the toughest course to schedule because it's two things. It's a sit-down classroom and it's driving. So, and it was just amazingly difficult to get kids into driver's ed. And that was just one course that they needed and wanted.
Now we get to book it ourselves. They're giving us a voucher. I will have to say that. We did get a voucher.
I'm good, everyone has said it.
Oh, okay. I want to add one thing.
Sure.
That I would say as a pro, that I've always felt like a lot of people's perspective, and I probably said this before, has been that their elementary schools are drawing people into their communities. And I just still want to go with, I think if we had a larger high school, which would be stronger, I think if it was larger, that would be a draw to here. And that would fill up the elementary schools and kind of help our problem. And I don't, it's a build it and they will come mentality, but try to throw my eggs into that basket. And that I think that a town elementary school is not going to save the town, but like a strong high school can save a lot of towns.
Elementary schools, say the tenants.
Yeah, right now. Yeah, Liz.
So, sorry for the lack of video. Just you all have done and said all the things. So I really appreciated this circle that we just had, and I think I'd like to. The only thing to add is for the identity piece of the con, the loss of identity, I would kind of redirect us back to some of the presentation that Mary Kate gave to the state board about how even though it would be a great challenge, and we've just gone through COVID and it's been a great challenge, and the pro of stability weighs heavily, and when it's stability in so many areas with the merger, and that if we look at even something like our lacrosse team, I think that the identity piece might be a challenge, but once it's overcome, the opportunities that we could have in expanding and growing a new identity together could actually be a major pro as well. If we can start to imagine what that might look like, and how we could hold and bring and layer in our strengths with each other, I think that we really have a lot to offer, even socially, to each other.
Liz? Yeah, Mary Kate wants to add.
So there was one thing from the article that I really like too, is that we put in at Article 14E, the community involvement piece. And I know in the past articles, it wasn't nearly as strong as these articles. So that piece of making sure that the new board goes and works and gets feedback from our communities, I think I'm really happy about that being part of our articles. And I think that will help us to function more strongly. And Liz, yeah, the MAV lacrosse team, they love playing together.
Did everyone see the state board? Did everyone watch it, hear what Mary Kate said? I know I'm putting you on the spot. I don't mean to. Just a little bit,
Well, I
little
just,
part, that little part.
I just talked about, so we played in the state finals and we had lost 16-3 to a very strong Hartford team during the regular season. We lost 10-7 in the finals, and we were disappointed to lose. But I just was reflecting just before the state board meeting, because it happened a few days before the meeting, about just all the things my kids learned, like players, they perseverance, working hard, showing up, respecting officials and other players. They learn to lose with grace and to learn things from losing. I mean, just so, so many of those intangibles. And for me, I think, those intangibles are really a big piece of what helps people to succeed. And for other kids, it's art or music or theater, it's a language, it's an academic course. And so what the Merger Study Committee to me is about is providing those opportunities so that kids can find those things they're passionate about and develop those kinds of skills that are going to make them successful. So that's what I talked about in that piece. And that's, as I've gone through this process through the committee and learned things through the study, that's kind of the bottom line. And I feel like, when we just went around the circle, right? It's about the kids. And I think the state board reflected back to us and said, it was clear that we're really student focused and equity and trying to do what's best for kids.
I want to sort of add to that, not that I can add that as well. Well, Mary Kate was saying that, my thoughts were a little bit different. I was thinking how two schools came together with this and this team and worked together and did it together, so that's kind of what I was thinking through my head, that how they came together like they do for the other things, other sports and yeah. So. Who's got,
This is probably a little divergent. I didn't comment on the new wrinkle with supervisory union, but I guess particularly in the MAUSD, but probably this merger committee as well, should be understanding that supervisory board structure, which is 3, 3, and 3. Understand how, hopefully it's a contingency, but understand how to affect proportional voting on that board as opposed to 3, 3, and 3.
That's different for you. I sort of know, but I want to. The basic concept is you can ask the state board for a different configuration. How you do it is what I have a question about. And I don't remember because I've done it. So,
and I'm not advocating for the supervisory union, but the handwriting's on the wall. If it is, we don't want to end up as a supervisory union with disproportionate representation at that issue.
The other towns don't approve stuff for withdrawal. That's a different.
That would change things, but you still got 2 wild cards. 3.
Yeah, but I think it seemed like the start of these was the biggest.
That seemed very significant, yeah.
piece.
I agree with you there, but as far as understanding the contingencies, I think that's important.
are we feeling like we want to vote tonight?
Yes.
We are. Okay.
Carol's not here.
I know. Do we have a form?
Yeah.
Let's see something.
10 or 14
Or 16.
Oh, 11.
11.
Stephanie's not here.
Stephanie and Troy.
Stephanie, Troy, and then Carol.
Brad.
So there's 5.
That's 15.
With 11 of 16.
11 and 15, I think, so 15 of it.
Yes.
11 and 16, Lori?
11 and 15, and we have a list.
11 and
15.
And there's 15.
But there's
Yeah,
5
I got it. So there's
Four
11.
You want to go as
I'm not inclined to let the possibility of some supervisor union issue come up affect us here. We pressed on. I think we ought to fairly vote on merge or not merge. Let other things occur after that. We should have something to say about that later, if it comes up, But to back off against that kind of a possibility, I think that is inappropriate.
I sort of agree with that. I think we know where, I think we all kind of agree with that. We know what happens if we don't merge in terms of student opportunity. We like fairly confident where that goes. And I think possibility of something unsavory coming out of voting to merge, which I guess is a possibility we do not merge. Seems like a bad choice.
Kevin.
I'd like to make a motion to recommend that we form merge. I'd like to make the recommendation that we merge. Here, I thought I added.
Articles of agreement.
Can you recommend the merger, given the discussion, as a result of the discussion of pros and cons, that it's clear that the student benefits outweigh any sort of cons?
Approve the articles.
So improve your agreement.
And we have a second. We have a motion on the floor to recommend a merger and approve the articles of agreement. Is there any discussion? And how do we want to vote?
Should we send out
Roll call.
7 months.
Well, I did have a request to do a ballot, but we didn't bring them separate. I think the ramifications of how they were voting, there was concern, but
I can rip up paper.
it's not up to me. I think that doesn't matter to me. Right, we're not voting on how to vote. No. Any discussion on this?
How do you want to vote on the way you're going to vote about it?
Yeah, no.
Oh my gosh, you just there.
Any discussion on the motion that's on the floor?
Oh, Liz has her hand up.
Liz does.
I just was gonna say that I can do ballot. I've done it before by emailing the chair my vote. If you want to do it on paper, I don't want me being online to hold you back from that.
Thank you, Liz. Oh, we can't ask. But we can take public comment on an action item. All right, having no further discussion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstentions?
So I'll also just say, I got an email, I just saw it from Brad Johnson, who said that he's appointing me as proxy to vote against merger. So
I don't know if Robert's rules allow.
I'm just sharing.
So the motion carries to recommend a merger and approve the articles of agreement.
You have to do a roll call because it's not unanimous and it's by, oh, we're in person. No, you
We're
don't
in
have to do a
person.
roll call, sorry. Yeah.
So
And
there,
one.
so was there 10 yeses and 1 no, then no abstentions, is that what the?
Well, Liz can
Yeah, what was Liz?
email her vote
No,
to.
she can. Let's just say, like,
Yes.
Moving on. Draft report review feedback, next steps. Hope we can table it, it's almost 9 o'clock. July meeting date, that's a Tracy, so I'm gonna move on to the July meeting date, which we had talked about doing on the 20th. Right?
We have to have another one to deal with this draft report.
I would like to have another one to deal with the draft report instead of doing, unless everyone wants to stay here tonight.
I make a motion to move the draft report to a July meeting.
Well, the July meeting is gonna take place concurrently with the
Right.
state board, so we need it before that.
It'll
And
have
they
to
do
be-
better when they get things in advance.
There'll have to be a fair bit in advance of that.
Yeah,
yeah,
July
it's like,
State board's gonna need time to review,
So
we
actually,
need it next week.
and I would back it up a bit more, I think next week would work, because the secretary needs it as well to be able to make a recommendation to the state board. So we need to give plenty of notice, so next week I think we do that.
So do we want to plan a meeting date for next week?
We can do that. Do we want Monday, Jens?
I wouldn't be able to be there in person.
But could you zoom in?
I could zoom in.
Anyone else available on Monday?
Not sure, I won't know.
I can do Monday.
I can do Monday.
Do we know Tracy's availability?
No, we
No,
don't.
we'll wait
We
if she
might.
comes. We're planning another meeting.
Next Monday, next Tuesday, next Wednesday? what-
Tuesday, we have our school board
Oh,
meeting.
yeah, no, not next Tuesday then. We were looking at the 27th. Actually, we were about ready to vote to bring that to a different meeting.
Legal?
No, the draft report review feedback.
Did we approve the legal?
Yes,
And you missed it, but we voted to.
we voted to recommend the merger.
And so you would like another meeting
To
to
write
prepare
it.
for the state board of ed and finalize the report,
Yes,
Yes.
we're
And you
looking
would
at
like to-
Monday, the 27th.
which would be fine for me. As long as I could get here early to do another thing virtually, which I'm sure I could work on Gloria.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would be at virtual.
So what time? What time?
I
6:30.
work, that would be fine, yeah.
Or earlier.
I don't have the cost.
Yeah, you go earlier.
Anyone available to go before 6:30?
You have to. No, so you're one.
I'll be out.
I mean, we could do 3, we could do 4, we could do
I
10,
can
we could
do
do
4.
7
I
a.m.
can do 4.
All right, 4 o'clock, anyone be able to do 4 o'clock?
How many do we need?
You have a board, go ahead and do that one.
I can do 4.
Kevin, can you take the day off?
Oh, man, I gotta check with the dog on that one.
Ed's in Pennsylvania.
I'll be on the road coming back from Pennsylvania.
Can you zoom in?
Hmm?
Can you zoom in?
By phone?
I'll be in a car.
Perfect.
Driving?
You can zoom or just.
I was on a city council meeting my whole way here.
It's
Went
way
in
harder
and
to
out
get
every
things
hill I went
nowadays,
over.
Well, we just need to make sure we're gonna have a forum.
Right.
So how many do we have?
You need to have 9.
We need to have 9. I can do it.
I can do it.
I can-
Becca can do
Show
it.
of hands who can do
I'm
it,
sorry.
so we have actual numbers.
So what time?
Yeah.
are we-
Sorry,
Four.
Four?
Becca's in hand.
I can do it.
4 o'clock.
We need 8, sorry.
Okay, what about Liz?
Not
She's
4
on.
o'clock.
You got 4 o'clock.
Yeah.
Oh.
60, I think.
Liz is okay.
We got a few others that aren't here, you know.
Yeah, I know that Carol works in Burlington. She probably can't, but I don't know what her schedule is.
She does some stuff virtually.
Yeah, she
so
does, right.
She's good at known it every morning. This week.
So 4 o'clock.
4 o'clock on Monday.
Troy or staff might be available at 4 on Monday.
Yep.
So just to facilitate that meeting, it would be helpful, everybody read through the draft report. What else would be helpful, getting comments to you ahead of time?
Yep, I've gotten comments from some already. So what I will do is,
And then there's parts that you need some volunteers for, do you want to talk about that?
And that, the meetings will be in person.
Yes. Yes.
yes. I will,
Can we bring the owl?
I would like to add the pros and cons and
Okay.
reshare it with you. And I will share it with you as a PDF in addition to sharing it through Google, because I know some people have a hard time accessing it. My theory is that you had to be logged into your correct, the account, the Google account I shared it with. So if you have a different Google account when you're on that, maybe that was it, but I'm not sure. So I will, if those that have written pros and cons, email them to me. I will reshare it with you by noon Thursday. I say with great confidence and hope I can do it. So you'll have a few days to look at it. I will do my best to add the narrative sections that need to be added. I'll add that student piece we discussed at the beginning of the meeting. So really what you need to do is craft the wording of your recommendation. Unless there's major concerns about the contents, which I doubt there is because it's really just the word done. It's more.
Would anybody be willing to put a draft together? Ed, I thought you were really articulate in
Say, again,
starting us out.
put together what?
So it would be the,
The language of your recommendation. We recommend,
oh, it doesn't need a Y, the Y part.
no,
The
I
pros
was
and
gonna get
cons
to
are
that.
what?
Yeah, I would back it up. I mean, I think you would say something like, overall, we concluded that the pros outweigh the cons. It's in the best interest of students.
That's what Kevin said.
Okay,
Yeah.
Yeah.
so that's, yeah, I was just thinking
But I'll do
you're,
the full pros and cons,
Yeah.
kind of an executive summary. This is what we recommend and why. And then they can read on and see the pros and cons analysis and all the data behind it.
so if it's just dry language, yeah. That we can either do at the meeting or I can try to do, all the I don't have that.
Yeah, I don't even know if I can read it. Okay,
Language that's common.
Well, did you use that language in the morning, in the motion? Was there some?
just like
working
we
language in the
recommend.
motion? Maybe that can be your
Recommend a
starting
merger.
here. That can be the starting point. It's the motion. that Kevin made.
Yeah. it's-
Wasn't
We
coherent.
recommend the merger.
All right,
And so we'll do the report and we'll prepare for the state board of ed meeting. And that's it.
communication key points for tonight.
Received and, it's
The status of. Reference list.
You zoom again, so I can hear you.
Once I know what I'm going to say, I will do that. So we received a number of updates on student implications of student feedback, the implications of H727 and
State Board of Education.
yeah. I don't even know how to get into the other updates, so no.
Discuss the pros and cons, approve the articles of agreement, and made a decision to recommend.
Discuss.
Yes, discuss starts as.
Status of Starkborough.
I do have one quick question. Now that that recommendation has been advised, does that mean we're done? After, or do we stay on until the vote? Do we? I don't know.
About that.
Interesting.
July 20th.
Yeah, you definitely stay on through July 20th. I have some legal homework to do to ask about the warning. There
It
is,
dissolves at the vote.
whether we can add things. What did you say?
I believe our committee dissolves at the vote.
Yeah, I think H727 says you dissolve at the vote, yes.
Oh, this,
But we don't have to meet
November 8th.
twice a month.
Assuming the state board approves your.
I'd say, like, we did a lot for Act 46, a lot of community engagement and kind of, in some ways, continued our pros and cons and discussion of the whole thing in that part of the process. So I think it was just organized differently, how we went
Might
about it.
Be a legal requirement for a public forum ahead of the vote.
Yeah.
So I think ANWSD and MAUSD technically host the public forum, but they're gonna need your help probably. And they can probably do a joint one. But
Makes
because
sense.
it's kind of new.
Yeah, Eric.
Since we are recommending, is it partly our responsibility to make sure that there are people who will run for the new school
Yes.
board before, in time to get on the ballot? And I, you know, I'm not volunteering myself or anything, but
you should.
But I do feel like it's our responsibility if we're gonna recommend it, then we need to make sure that we have enough, we have 15 people on board who would, want to be on board.
So I have, at the next meeting, I can give you the specific timeline with when board member petitions are due and things like that. And an update on, I will consult with the superintendents about ways to work with the town clerks, the 10 town clerks, and have some thoughts about how I can support that. So I'll give you an update on that on Monday.
In other clerical pieces, the sharing of the report with the other boards, right, when that's done? We just need to map that out, given that it's gonna be July, basically.
Yes.
And I don't think the boards meet probably until the middle of August.
They won't need to meet before July 20th.
We'll have to just take a look at that
Yeah.
language and see if it's a requirement that it's shared before it goes to the state board.
I know we will share it before it goes to the state board. We can share it after Monday.
Right.
well, there's a MAUSD meeting Tuesday.
A&W's done until August.
But thank you for adding that to my.
They can have another meeting. Right?
So excited.
Why?
Just
Which
out of
one?
curiosity, what is the date of the potential spaghetti creation versus
July.
the date that the ballots have to go in? Are there like, are they the same date? Are they?
The September state board meeting, I don't know off the top of my head which day, middle of September, mid to late teens.
Probably the third Wednesday of September.
All right, it's 9:00. I would like public comment at this time. Does anyone mind that we're moving forward or do we still? Okay, yeah. Is there anyone on Zoom or in the audience that would like to make some public comment? We'll give you a couple minutes. All right, having no further public comment. I'd love to entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Abstentions? No discussion, motion carries.
Well done.